Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
You braved the rain today. It's very nice of you to come and brave the rain. I'm going to continue my talk on the Maha-Nidana Sutta and consciousness. So this is actually my fifth talk on the subject. So for those of you who were not here from my other talks, I'm going to give a very brief summary and then go directly to the practice of that we understand about consciousness. So the Maha-Nidana Sutta, the Great Links discourse. Nidana means links, Maha means great. So these links refer to the 12 links of dependent origination, one of the most important teachings of the Buddha that amplify in greater detail the Four Noble Truths. And for those who have studied the actual life of the Buddha, we know that it was during a meditation on the great links, the 12 links, that was accompanied the Buddha at the time of his enlightenment, when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree. So this is a very important topic, and as such, many of us who study the practices of meditation and mindfulness and the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, we really see that the great links are very important in our understanding. So what is very good about this particular sutta, because there are a number of different discourses in which the Buddha speaks about the 12 links of dependent origination. But it is in this particular sutta that he goes into greater depth into just two of the 12 links. So which two? The first one being craving, because it is usually with craving that most people become familiar with the 12 links. When a person is sitting in meditation, for example, and they're attempting to quiet the mind oftentimes is jumping around, and many thoughts come into the mind. And we can say that all of the thoughts that enter into the mind as we're sitting in meditation are to one degree or another related to the mind craving. The mind is seeking out something to pay attention to. So even when we give the mind something to pay attention to, let's say the breath or the body, the mind doesn't want to stay there. It jumps, because it's untrained, it jumps to other things. What's going to happen later today, what happened earlier in our life, how long do I have to sit here? All of these kinds of things jump into the mind. So as a person begins to develop their ability to be okay with sitting for maybe even a short period of time, okay, for 4 minutes I can sit and not be concerned about anything else. They begin to be aware, oh my, still my mind, even for 4 minutes, jumps to many, many different things. Okay, I'll sit for 1 minute, still the mind jumping around. Or the mind becomes very sleepy, the mind begins to crave sleepiness. So many of these things that the mind does, this is related to craving, and craving being the source of suffering. A person becomes aware of this. So there are 10 different steps that the Buddha talks about that I've explained in a previous talk. They're online, eventually. You can see about the 10 different types of the steps that are part of craving. So this is discussed in the Maha-Nidana, or the Great Links Discourse. So I said that there were two parts that were illuminated. First, the craving part, because that's the part that usually people first encounter when they sit. And then the Buddha goes into great detail about one of the other of the 12 links. He goes into great detail about consciousness. And so the almost half of the sutta is devoted to an explanation about consciousness. And the first parts of this really are a way of being able to demonstrate that other ways that people have looked at consciousness have misunderstandings in them. So the Buddha goes through and examines these misunderstandings about consciousness and shows that these ways of understanding consciousness fall short. And ultimately, the Buddha comes to a section at the end of the sutta which he calls the 8 emancipations. And in my last talk, I got through just describing a little bit about the first 3 of these 8 emancipations. So let me go into a little bit more detail about this. So I have a chart similar to the chart that I handed out last time. I just added a few things. So on the left-hand side, we have the 12 links that are explained in the Maha-Nidana Sutta. And these 12 links start with ignorance and go all the way up to aging and death. And as you see, 2 that are in bold, consciousness and craving. And then at the very top there is a little bit of a reference to something that comes before the 12 links. So the way that these 12 links go is that the Buddha says that aging and death are dependent upon birth, and birth is dependent upon existence, and existence is dependent upon clinging. Or in the other order, we can say that craving and clinging, craving gives rise to clinging. When there is no craving, there is no clinging. Clinging gives rise to existence. Where there's no clinging, there is no existence, and so forth. So in another important teaching on the subject of the 12 links of dependent origination, called the Samadhi Sutta, the right view, you can say, discourse, Sariputra, who is giving that particular talk, not the Buddha, is asked, what comes before ignorance? What is ignorance dependent upon? And instead of saying, oh, there's nothing that depends on ignorance, this is the beginning of all things, Sariputta does not say that. He says ignorance is dependent upon what are called the tates, or asava. So this is, again, we can say, part of the 12 links. And this comes into play as we begin to understand consciousness in more detail. So I'm just kind of giving a little summary of some of the previous talks. Xiankuan gave a talk a few weeks ago on another topic, the Upanishad Sutta, the Transcendental Order. And in that particular discourse of the Buddha talks about how there's not just the 12 links of dependent origination, but there's also a practice that a person would enter into that would eventually lead them to a liberation. And the first of these, the first one is Sada, which can either be translated as faith or conviction, depending upon, because here in the Buddhist terminology, faith does not mean blind faith. It means being able to make a commitment or have a conviction toward something because of our direct understanding of it through our study and our practice. that we experience it directly. So then, when a person experiences this faith, then they would experience a great joy, and then be able to enter into deeper states of concentration called rapture, happiness, and then what we would call happiness that really, and this is not dependent upon physical form or receiving what it is that we want, but something that is much more profound. And then these levels of concentration would lead to a direct knowledge and vision of things as they are, which would then lead to what's called disenchantment, dispassion, and here what we're talking about is emancipation, which is part of these 8 emancipations, which then leads to the destruction of the taints. Remember, we were talking about that in the Samaditi Sutta, the right view sutta of how it is that a person would be able to destroy the taints. These are the things that cause us to remain anchored in this, what's called the desire realm, where we get stuck and suffer so much. So this is the Buddhist understanding of why it is that we suffer. So it's this eradication of the taints that lead us to ultimate liberation in this particular system. So this, as we will see, the stages of 8, 9, and 10, and 11, for example, and to the 12th stage of liberation, these are things that are talked about in other teachings that the Buddha is trying to help us to understand. So, if we move towards the center panel, and on the upper portion we have what's called the 5 aggregates. We can see that the Buddha says that we are made up of these 5 aggregates, this collection. That's what makes us who we are. And first there is our physical body, and then we have feelings and perceptions and conceptions about things. Our sense organs take things in, and we perceive them, and we also have thoughts about them, and then these thoughts form connections with each other. So one thought will connect with another thought, and these thoughts become habits, and this is what's called our mental formations. And when these mental formations gather together and form some kind of an identity, as we go through one moment to the next, one day to the next, 1 year to the next, this identification is what is called consciousness. And then alongside that, you'll see a term called anapanasati, which is called mindfulness of the breath. This is another discourse that the Buddha gives. And in a previous talk that I had given, the Anapanasati Sutta, I talked about how it is that it's divided actually into 16 parts. The mindfulness of the breath is 16 parts, and you can aggregate the 16 parts into 4 sections. And it's really the first section that most beginning people are practicing. The mindfulness of the breath. If the breath is long, it's long. If it's short, it's short. Focusing on the breath as a whole and being sensitive to the breath being connected to the body. And so it's this 4th part of the sensitivity of the breath to the body that connects the anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath, to satipatthana, mindfulness of the 4 foundations, the first part of which is mindfulness of the body. connected to the breath. So there's this interconnection that takes place. And for those people who are involved in mindfulness practice and meditation, and from the Buddhist point of view, they know these particular two discourses that the Buddha gave, the most important instructions on the practice of mindfulness meditation, the mindfulness of the breath, and the four foundations of mindfulness. So the second section of Anapanasati, if we're dividing it into four parts, the second part has to do with sensitivity to mental formations or our habit energy. So the person, after they've been able to calm their breath and being able to focus on the body, they become aware of the thoughts that they have and how these thoughts aggregate with each other, connect to each other, and form this mental pattern that we keep wanting to go back to over and over and over again. So the third part then becomes a deeper understanding of how this forms what we call our mind consciousness. So this is the third of the four steps in Anapanasati. Sensitive to the mind consciousness. The fourth part, and that's the part that I've delineated here, begins with the section on seeing all things as impermanent. Then being able to understand how to not connect to these things with strong desire. This is called dispassion. So when we experience something, and we don't experience it with the feeling of, this is mine. This is who I am. This is me. We don't do that. And I had spoken in my last talk about the medicine that I received from Sammy, about the cure for the disease of craving. So when a person begins to have this understanding, this passion, then what happens is that they're grasping, they're holding on to things in this particular way, we are able to let go. And our connection on that level ceases, it stops. We stop holding on in that way. This is not uncommon in our own direct experience and on our daily life. Let's say we have a particular job. We work somewhere. We begin to realize that, this job is impermanent. I should let go of my desire or craving or identification with myself with this job. And after a while, either we go to another job or perhaps at some stage in our life we retire, we no longer have this craving for this, then that craving has ceased. And we can fully let it go. We can relinquish it, let it go. This also happens in our relationships with people, even those that we love dearly. We recognize that our child, as an infant, the infancy stage is impermanent. We like holding the child all the time. Eventually we realize the child gets really heavy. This is this passion here. I'm going to put the child down, the child begins to walk. So holding the child so much, cessation of that. Then we're able to let the person go. They go on with their life. We don't hold on to them. We let them go, relinquishment. So this on a small level is always happening, but this also is something that we can experience in relationship to our own consciousness. we recognize that our own consciousness is impermanent. We don't have so much craving or passion for it. We can begin to let it go. Then our own consciousness, we can see that it is, at some point, the identification with ourselves ceases, and we can fully let it go. And at that point, we're able to let go of the desire realm and move forward. Now, when a person lets go of the desire realm altogether, this does not mean that suddenly they end up raving around all over the place. That's not the case. In point of fact, the mind moves to another level of awareness, another level of consciousness. So, the desire realm is just one place, the mind alone. I was at a group not so long ago where people were asked a very good question. They were asked to write down 10 things that they were grateful for. They were writing down their gratefulness. And these are very nice people. People that you would want to spend time with. They're very nice people. And when they went around the room, they were asked to go around the room maybe 3 or 4 times. Each time they were going to list something that they were grateful for. I observed what it was that they were grateful for. So one person said, "Oh, I am grateful for chocolate." Oh, okay. Everybody laughed. That was good. So another person said, "Oh, I'm grateful for having a nice house." Another person said, "Oh, I'm grateful because I was able to switch jobs." Another person said, "Oh, I'm grateful that my aunt recovered from her surgery." So all of these things that they were relating to, they were all part of the desire realm. And so when they got to me, oh boy. The first thing I said is, I'm grateful that I have a teacher. I'm grateful that I have a group that I can practice with. I was going to talk to them about some other things that I was grateful for, but I realized that what I'm thinking about in terms of my own gratitude has changed. Because there was at one time that I would be grateful for the physical things in life, but not so much so. My mind is moving away from that now and moving more towards wanting to have a greater ability to let go. Not always easy to do this. So when we talk about the 8 emancipations, we see that there's a very strong connection between the 8 emancipations and what we call the 8 absorptions. In Pali, the word jhana. So let me explain this a little bit for those people who are new to the practice. And just to plant a seed, because it may very well be that this is something that you may not encounter very much as you move through your lives. You may or may not encounter things beyond the desire realm too much. But when a person practices mindfulness, in the Anapanasati Sutta, before the Buddha goes into the description of the 16 practices, he first gives a list of the different people who are practicing and retreat and the different levels that they're practicing on. And it's in reverse order, but in the order that we would be most able to understand it. First, there are people who are doing the simple practice of mindfulness of the breath. And then the next group, a little bit more advanced, practicing mindfulness of the body. And the next group, a little bit more advanced, they're practicing the 4 great mind states. The Brahma Vihara, they're practicing how to cultivate within themselves loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity. Now this is very, very important. We're reminded that all of the people that are practicing in this retreat with the Buddha have already been able to understand the importance of generosity and morality and the different realms, the desire realm, the form realm, etc. So these people already understand that, so that when they're practicing, they realize that as they begin to go to deeper practice, they need to be able to cultivate a sense of loving kindness and compassion that transcends their own personal involvements with people. So we start with our personal involvements with people, but then we start with loving kindness, for example. We start with ourselves. Without being able to have kindness toward ourselves, very difficult to do that towards others. Then we move towards someone we love, someone we like, even to someone who has been a neutral person first, and then to someone who has been difficult, caused us to suffer. And then towards all beings everywhere. And those who have practiced with me, when I go through this particular practice of loving kindness, you'll note that I add one more group in. When between the difficult person and all beings everywhere, I always feel like it's so difficult for me to practice towards all beings everywhere, because I always feel like I leave somebody out. So I pick one group and say I practice towards one group of people somewhere, not necessarily people, it can be any beings somewhere in the world. Now, of course, my practice most recently, when I'm thinking about a group of people, oftentimes gravitates towards a place in the world which is somewhat more unstable than usual. And that's the city of St. Louis. So lots of my loving kindness meditation is cultivated towards the people in Ferguson and our surrounding area, all around St. Louis right now, waiting for the grand jury to come in, hoping that no matter what happens, we will be able to be peaceful and kind towards each other. That all beings will be able to do that. So this cultivation of loving kindness and compassion that happens in the heart is to change our own being to such a degree that we become an embodiment of loving kindness and compassion, so that we don't do any harm to anyone. This is so important. Just the other day, the Dalai Lama said that if all children 8 years old were taught to meditate, we would be able to eradicate violence in the world in 1 generation. This is a very good aspiration. So this practice of being able to develop mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the great mind states, loving kindness and compassion, primary, then leads to the next practice, which is to be able to enter into deeper states of concentration. So actually, in the Buddha's time, there was really no word for meditation. This is something that came about later. There was mindfulness practice, and then there was concentration. Concentration is this next step. After you develop the mindfulness in these other stages, then a person is able to focus on mindfulness of the different realms. So when a person's mind enters into the next stage, the person becomes more sensitive and aware of what are called the 5 absorption factors, or the 5 jhana factors. The first 2 of which, called vitaka and vichara, have to do with how something begins, a thought or a feeling starts, and how it's sustained. So as a person practices in meditation, their sensitivity to how thoughts arise and are sustained becomes more developed. So at that point in the practice, the person is sitting and they're focusing on the breath, the point of contact, the feeling of the breath coming in and out of the nostrils, for example, just sitting, being aware of this, and when the thought or the feeling somewhere else arises, the person sees that very, very acutely, very much as it starts, and does not have any craving for it to be sustained. So this sustainedness, we see it as impermanent, we don't have any craving for it, we allow it to cease, and we let it go. So this practice of impermanence, dispassion, cessation, relinquishment is applied over and over to this arising and then the abiding of the thought. So this leads us to what happens during the emancipation process. The Buddha describes this for us, that when we see forms, we just see it as a form. We don't attach to it. We apply the principle of, this form is impermanent, I don't have to, it's not part of me, I don't have to have it. I can let it go. And so on, through the first 3 emancipations, particularly after the first 4 actually relate to the forms and how to relate to forms without attaching to them. So even if you see a form and it's beautiful, you see the form, you see it, you enjoy it as it is, but you don't have to hold on to it. You're able to let it go. And so finally, in the 4th stage, there's a complete transcending of the perception of physical form. So there's no need to hold on to it. And this gives rise then to what are called the formless stages of consciousness. So rather, I'm not going to go into the formless stages of consciousness today, only to say that these 4 stages of formless consciousness are stages that relate to how consciousness itself is something that we can let go of. In the form stage, it's almost as if we are letting go of the mental formations that have aggregated and collected themselves, and we're being able to just allow them to be and not to attach to them. So we've changed our mental habit. But in the formless stages, consciousness itself is something that we begin to understand as something that we can let go of. And so we begin to have a direct realization of how to let go of our own consciousness. This is more than enough for tonight. So this is the path of Buddhism. This is why we say no attainment, nothing to be attained. Because attainment relates to getting something. And in our Buddhist practice, we're not trying to get something. We're attempting to let go, relinquish, give it up, be of benefit. This is the Mahayana view. Be of benefit. So as we connect with the four great mind states, we can say, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings never be separated from the altruistic joy which is free from suffering. And may all beings dwell in the great equanimity which is free from attachment, aversion,